This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Not horrible, because I shouldn't complain too much, but
you got a little hat on today. Is that a zero now hat? I mean,
No.
A zero eyes hat?
No, it's not. That hat doesn't fit me right. I like the hat. It just doesn't fit my big head. It's meant for people with smaller heads. I got this hat when me and my wife hiked the Narrows at Zion National Park.
Oh, no.
So that's where you have to like put on like full on waders and you like actually trek through water.
Yeah.
I mean, she was totally fine. It only went up to her hips, but then for me, it's like.
So she had to hold you up above the water. Come here, little Ethan.
She's like, this is great. I'm like, oh.
Blah, 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 blah.
For reference, my wife is 6 feet tall, and I am about six inches shorter. So there you go. There's your little tidbit of information. At some point, we're going to do some like trivia and see how much people have actually been paying attention.
Okay. I don't know how we're going to do that, but we'll figure it out.
Totally will. That'll be like your retirement party.
Get it going.
That will never happen. Kelly's not allowed to retire. He's already been told. We're going to start off with our in the news section, and this is a really interesting one. This might be more interesting than the chicken wings one. Maybe. There's not as much detail to it, so it might be a little shorter discussion, but it's still pretty wild.
This is America. We can speculate all we want.
That's true. All right, so here we go. I'm gonna just I'm gonna try to read. Maybe we'll try playing the video, but basically the headline says over 100 juveniles attend massive boozy house party at school principal's home. There's a lot to unpack.
Just in that.
Just in the title. So then further on, they tell you that there was another teacher from the same school who was also intoxicated. You want me to kind of read through it again, or you want me to give me? So an elementary school principal has been arrested after allegedly throwing a massive boozy house party for over 100 juveniles. So, key word there, elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean like elementary kids were there?
Well, it just says juveniles in the.
Which could be anything, under 18?
18.
I mean, still, like, you have to be 21, legally drink. Mm-hmm. So you're not even close.
Not even close, yeah.
And
so
that's wild.
Yeah.
So this was I'll make it general. This was in Florida.
So we've talked ad nauseum about making sure that we don't do things to harm our children, and that we look at all of these external forces that are impacting our students. And I know that there have been times that we said, the schools have to watch what they're doing as well, internally, what they're doing. And you can't just point fingers straight out at society and the external world from the schools and not examine your own behaviors. You just can't do that. And there are, I would love to say, oh, this is just a one-off, but it's not. And I'll tell you that I've experienced this personally. We had a teacher. It wasn't a principal, but a high school teacher who had, I don't know what you call it, like special programs. It's not special ed, but special programs like journalism and different programs that were under this teacher. And they were having parties on the weekend. And class members were coming up to this guy's house. His students were coming up, and the parents started complaining that they were dropping their kids off at this teacher's house, and they were coming out intoxicated and had been smoking marijuana and all kinds of these different things. And you're sitting there going, well, wait a second, what? And sure, he ended up getting fired, but this is not a one-off. Right? This is not a one-off. And we hear about school staff members abusing children. We hear about school staff members bullying students, belittling them, saying you're not going to amount to anything, just keep moving through the system. You're going to get a degree, but you're not going to go much beyond that, those kinds of things. And we have to stop that. We just have to stop that. It's plain and simple that sometimes, not in every case, and I would venture to say not in the majority of the cases, but there are teachers and administrators and staff members who are harming our children. So let's say it that way, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. And so it just baffles me when we hear a story like that and you just go, look at, there are so many things that we're trying to deal with from a school safety perspective. And now I have to worry about the weekend parties. I'm not even sure it was a weekend, but a weekend party at a principal's house, an elementary school principal. I don't care if they're high school age kids or what have you, but that's your elementary school principal and a teacher, I think from the same school, if I understood that correctly, throwing parties. And that's not the type of people you want in your school system. And that principal is in a position of leadership. That's a culture issue. That's a culture issue, not a one-off. There is some culture there where that principal felt that was okay. It just baffles me.
Giving alcohol to minors is against the law, people.
Well,
I shouldn't have to say.
Not only that, but let's look at
Like, that's a really just high level. Like,
yeah,
doesn't
right?
matter if you're a teacher or not. Like,
that's right. But
man,
it's more, to me, it's more egregious in this case because it is a teacher, because it is a principal, because these kids are thinking, oh, this is so cool. We get to party with principal so and so and teacher so and so. Isn't that fun? No, it is absolutely not. And you didn't read this part of the article because if I remember correctly, you said that one required medical attention due to the level of intoxication that they had.
Yes.
And so we have this teacher, this principal, who has now opened up the liability of this whole party thing to the school. Now, you could say that this was outside of the scope of the employment of the principal and the teacher. There is nothing in our policies that says this is acceptable, except this. What is the relationship between generally speaking, what is the relationship between a principal, a teacher, and students?
What's the relationship?
What's the relationship? It's hierarchical. It's a position of power. And anytime a student is in contact with a teacher or a principal, it's connected to the school, right? So generally speaking, when you go, you're at the grocery store and you're talking to the principal, even if you're just saying hi, especially nowadays when we've said we need to create positive relationships that have a trusted relationship between students and the staff at your school. They need somebody they can trust. So now we've extended that relationship. right? So anytime, if you have to have a relationship where somebody can trust you and you can trust them, that is going to be positive. And if I need support, I can go to you. When I say hi to you in the grocery store, or we have a conversation in passing outside of the school or at a sporting event or here, that is building that positive relationship and extending it beyond the school hours so that when I'm at school, I can continue that relationship. Especially the younger kids can compartmentalize and say, this is Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones, who happens to be my principal, but I'm outside, so it doesn't count. Everything they do in the back of their head is saying, that's my principal.
Yeah.
That's one of the teachers at my school.
Man.
Right. So we see this a lot in the law enforcement arena.
Hmm.
Right. So if people know that you're in law enforcement and you have a relationship with them and a work relationship with them, but now you're outside of that there's it's very difficult for people to separate the two.
Yeah. Like just because like if your friend is a cop and then he's not on duty and you go and do something stupid, like
That's
that
exactly right.
doesn't mean your friend's not
Right.
responsible for basically.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's why a lot of law enforcement officers get separated almost to the point of divorce from their friends, their high school friends, their college friends, because the relationship changes.
Wow, that sounds like a lonely occupation. Jeez.
Well, that's ultimately that's one of the reasons that cops are generally only friends with other cops,
Mm,
right? Because you walk into a party, you walk into a barbecue, and unless people understand your predicament, which most people don't, and you can't share it with them. So it's always, oh, there's Kelly. He's the cop, right?
quick, hide it.
Right, right. Or,
I mean,
or I'm out of here.
if you're a cop, you could just hang out with, people that don't commit crimes or
Yeah,
all
but it's
that.
still, it's.
Yeah, you still kind of have that like that looming like you feel like you're being watched or analyzed
Yeah,
or
you're walking
something.
around with a balloon tied to your belt,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
I mean, it's always there. So it's very
Crazy.
difficult to separate. So, um, this is probably an extreme end, but it's not a one-off. I don't have that much experience in the schools, a couple years, but I've experienced it. So I know it happens. And
I
it's
wonder if it's like, I know some this might be controversial, but I know some parents that have this like I want to be friends with my kid. Is it kind of like that where the teacher or the whoever is in the school is like they view creating a positive relationship as, hey, I want this student to see me as a friend. And so
potentially
that's try to connect at that level is, hey, let's throw a party and I'll invite you over. It's like, well, no. So this goes back to like a conversation that you and I had, I think, off podcast. But as your role as an educator, the second that you get handed a kid, your role is that of basically their parent to some extent, and
legally, right? We
legally,
talked
and
about,
you have to protect them. You have to keep them safe as if their parent would keep them safe. So you have to treat these kids as if they're like your kid.
yeah. So, I mean, that's the other angle on this, right?
Yeah.
We hear schools saying all the time, we are the parent. We have the responsibility of being the parent when the child is in our care and custody. Legally, we have that, right? It's called in loco parentis, I believe. And that's there's we'll get into this into a little bit more into the main body of our podcast today. But the the fact is people I don't think understand what that means, but essentially from their perspective is we are the parents of those kids when they're in our schools in our care and custody. So if you want to take that kind of stance that we are the parents, is this how you expect parents to treat their kids as a society? Would you want your parents throwing these ragers, having coolers full of alcohol readily available, even this is it, I don't want to put a level of stupidity to this, but I'm going to, because it's just, generally speaking, it's dumb. But
It's yeah.
Unfettered access to alcohol. There is no limit to the amount of alcohol these kids had access to. They were in coolers. All they had to do is go up and grab whatever's in there. It just says coolers full of alcohol.
Yeah.
So we're thinking beer, wine coolers, whatever people are drinking these days. And they had access to that. That means there was no monitoring the level of alcohol that was given to any one particular person, which is also the legal responsibility of the person throwing the party.
Yes.
Right?
That like goes for like if you have a party with adults.
Adults, that's exactly right.
Like you're responsible. Like if someone at your party is like obviously well beyond the limit, you don't let them drive home.
You don't give them any more alcohol. You
Well, that too.
say, hey,
Right. It's
you've had
almost
enough.
like yeah, it's like
Come
you
give
cut
me a
them
hug.
off,
Let me tuck you in.
you order them an Uber or whatever,
Right,
and
right.
yeah, so it's like 10 times worse when we're talking about
That's right.
juveniles.
And it magnifies it when you're talking about juveniles that on a day-to-day basis you come into contact with, right? Assuming that they were her students, that it just, maybe they weren't her students, but who
I mean,
knows?
there was 100 students. I mean, there's got to be a couple of them in there that were
It just, either way,
crazy.
even if they were 100 seniors in high school, stupid.
Yeah.
All right, so on to the next controversial topic that we have for today. This is a good one.
This is gonna be rich.
That's a good one. That's a good comment. This is going to be rich.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a New Hampshire thing or if it's a.
That's an old English term.
Yeah, sometimes I do pick up on things my parents say, and they latch on. So I think that came from one of them, probably my mom. I think that's what she says. She's very Swedish. It comes from Sweden.
What's her maiden name?
Lord, but then her mom's side was Hanson. Her mom's side, all the her uncles are like, you can tell they're all Swedish. Anyways, yeah. So the next topic we're talking about is immigration. Immigration, the change in immigration policies and how those may affect your school. And what are we supposed to do as educators? Let's say, I want to make sure I say this right. Let's say you have some ICE, are they agents? ICE agents come into your school and say, hey, we've basically, we have this, this child's parent in custody, and we're here to also retrieve their child. That's what we're talking about. So what do you do as an educator?
So what we're really talking about is really broadens the scope of what you just said, though, right? Is what if ICE comes for any reason to take custody of a child they believe is here illegally in this country for whatever reason, right? Um, what's the policy and so forth. So let me preface this by saying there's a lot of chatter about this that started shortly after the new president took office last week. There's been a lot of, and in a nutshell, this puts into perspective our position on school safety and what we are doing and what we shouldn't be doing. Is we start reacting to this potential. We blow it up and we start reacting to it the day after he takes office. let me ask you, when did you first think that this presidency was going to involve immigration issues?
Within probably like 47 minutes.
40, 47 minutes of him declaring his presidency.
Yeah, that's
Should not be a surprise to anybody.
yeah.
And now we have this big upheaval of concern. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? These knee-jerk reactions to things. And frankly, this is where we're at. I mean, at the minimum, our schools should have been putting policies into place. We should have been looking at what this really means. What are our legal rights as a school? What are the legal rights of the child, the family, so forth, right? And then the consequences and impacts of those on our schools. At minimum, that should have started November 6th, right? When he was elected. Then it's just a matter of time at that point. We can see this storm of brewing, right? And so that's what frustrates me. Here's the as I started hearing, we should talk about this. We should start looking at policies. We should start discussing all of this. And this came up over the last couple of weeks. We're recording this on the what's today, the 29th of January. So I started hearing about, what should we do, so forth. Here's, from a school perspective, you need to get your legal counsel together. You need to develop policies. You need to give staff expectations on their behavior should they be confronted by an ICE agent or somebody else. And I will say that one of the things that people are lumping together is the law enforcement community. The vast majority of what they're talking about are federal agents, not your local law enforcement, not your state law enforcement. The vast majority. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, because a lot of times the federal agencies will ask local law enforcement for assistance in certain circumstances, but this is a federal issue, right? And generally speaking, it's a federal crime, but the local law enforcement tends to stay away from this, but not always, but generally speaking. So developing policies, expectations, where is your legal stance at the school level, at the district level? And the reason I say that is I am not aware, and I'm sure somebody's going to, first of all, I'll tell everyone I do it all the time. I'm not an attorney, but I've had a fair amount of contact with the legal system in my 34 years in law enforcement, and I have an idea, but I am not aware of any exemption or protection that a school has to prohibit law enforcement from coming on and making an arrest. There are ways that should be done, and it needs to be done, but I don't think you can stop it. But I'm sure somebody, if I'm wrong, or there's a state jurisdiction or a local jurisdiction that has laws against it that I'm not aware of, then I understand that. But that's why you need to look to your counsel and say, hey, this is what you can and can't do, right? And so from a school's perspective. Now, that being said, we're talking mostly to school safety officials, directors, coordinators, specialists, those types of people. So now we have to look at it from that kind of perspective. How do these actions by outside agencies impact the safety of our schools and our students and staff, right? There's sample policies out there, there's suggestions and so forth, some of which I don't necessarily agree with. So you're going to have to look at those sample policies and suggestions, because I think some of these organizations are saying you should do this. but they have no legal right to tell you to do one thing or the other. Is just a suggestion, and
Yeah.
and most of the time, a lot of those sample policies and suggestions are driven by political beliefs. And I'll leave it at that. So, from a school safety perspective, we have to stay in our lanes and say, okay, what happens if they come? How does that impact the school safety? And beyond just the student they're interested in. Now, there's a lot of information, and everything I've seen right now from my perspective is that ICE agents, federal agents, are not going to just knock on the door and start saying, okay, line them up. And we're gonna determine the legal status of every student in the school. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right
No.
now, it's criminal behavior, criminal
Yeah.
history, family and parent related type stuff, and they're going to come and, as far as I understand the practices, they're going to go after a child or a specific person. If they're doing that, there's usually a legal document that's going to come with it, whether it's a warrant or a subpoena or something like that. But I will tell you that you got to be careful there, and when you start demanding paperwork, because not every arrest in the United States requires a warrant. There's different levels of arrests, and some of them do require, under certain circumstances, require an arrest warrant. Others do not. Right? So,
Hey, can you pause for just a second? There's like somebody in this house that drives my allergies.
are you allergic to your parents?
Maybe.
So, there when I've read some of these policies and suggestions and stuff in some articles, demand a warrant. I'm just saying that that's not always a good position to take, because not every circumstance requires a warrant, right? And well, and here's the other part, right? Is we're going to hold on to the child till we can get a hold of the parent. And this gets back into the in parentis or in loco parentis. We are the child's parent until the parent is present, right? And the interpretation of that. Now, again, I'm going to say this because I've had a fair amount of experience with this, but obviously I'm not an attorney. I don't practice this kind of law. But in loco parentis was really meant to provide people who have the care and custody of a child the ability to get medical care when that was needed, to report abuse, take care of abuse and neglect and so forth, for the physical, mental, emotional well-being of the child. That was the intent of it. I'm sure it's evolved in the many years that it has been in place. I think mid to late 80s, I think, was when that was actually put into place. But parents don't have a right to hide their child from law enforcement if I have a right to arrest them. So they're saying, hold on, contact the parents. I'm not sure that that's the best practice, but I think that's something that you're going to have to look at as the keeper of that child and somebody who wants and or needs to take custody of that child, because this is similar to, in many cases, similar to Child Protective Service coming in and so forth. So there's precedence. The whole point of this little conversation is make sure that you have policy. Make sure your policies align with your legal rights and authority. Make sure that the people who are most likely going to come into contact with a federal agent who is looking to take custody of a student for whatever reason, they understand that process, right? We're talking about it because of the political
It's a very
environment
politically charged
charged
topic
right now. That's why we're talking about it. But this has been going on for many years. And we're lumping all kids, and we should never do this, as all kids are good. There are absent The immigration issue, I'm sure almost all of us can look into the activities of gang members in schools, into kids that are involved in criminal activity, both on and off campus. And that is not a new phenomenon,
No.
right? And so the look at the whole picture, I guess is what I'm saying, is it's not just an immigration issue. It is an issue of, I have current custody of a child and I have somebody here saying that they need to take custody of that child who is not their parent. What is the process for that? Now, when we look at the other impacts, we need to look at that as well. So policies, procedures, training, policies, systems, people. What does that sound like?
That's your 3 pillars.
Pillars. That's right. Look at it from that perspective, and I think you'll do fine. Make sure everyone's on board. Make sure that your legal counsel, your district's legal counsel, is on board, because at some point, this is going to involve legal action. If you don't do it correctly, there are going to be staff members who are arrested, right?
And that's just like that's not going to look good, like if they have to do that in the school. Like if you like if they're coming in and you make a big fuss out of it, then it turns into some huge thing, and then you've got all these students watching this occur, and it just becomes this mess. And then it's like what we've talked about before, of like smaller things turning into like full-fledged riots.
Right.
So like
So here's the deal.
it's not far-fetched to say that, like, if you were to make a big fuss out of it, that it could result. It's not totally out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. So, I'm going to go out on the limb here. Here's what we're talking about. There's a correct way, and your guys are, all of the schools are going to have to figure out what the correct way is for them. There's a correct way to address these, and there's the wrong way, right? And because this is so politically charged and there's a lot of emotions involved with this on both sides, this isn't just you guys or just you guys. It's on both sides. And I get it. I totally get it. But here's the issue. If we don't handle those correctly, how does that impact our schools? Forget what the issue was. But we had, there was a time in 2018, 2019, where there were a lot of schools that were protesting. Kids in high schools and middle schools were walking out of school and protesting. Is this going to be one of those times? I don't know, but it has that potential, right? Is civil unrest. And civil unrest, walking out, holding signs, is one thing. But when we start adding the emotions and the politics, regardless of what side, especially when you have the political environment right now is so divided, you have two sides essentially, and those two sides clash, right? Then it blows up. Then we start having destruction of property. We have people starting to get hurt. We have uses of force required to quell those riots by law enforcement and other means, right? So that potential is there. So when we get back into talking about moving things left of bang, now is your time to prevent and mitigate all of those negative impacts.
Mm.
And we do that by how we respond to that knock on the door and says, I need to talk with X, so and so. And how that is handled will determine how that whole incident is handled and the impacts that it has. You can have very little impact or a great deal of impact, and everywhere in between, depending on how that first interaction goes, right? And I will say I'm starting to see emotions take over on social media, on Instagram and other social media, where there are teachers that are saying, I will fight to the death for this. That is not a good position here. That is never a good position.
I wish they could have that same mentality when it comes to just protecting their kids,
Right?
and actually taking the time to train and learn how to use something so that they can more adequately protect their students during a crisis. And
Right?
the whole mentality of, I'm not going to download an app on my phone.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you not have that passion for the safety of your kids in all cases?
That's right. Well, that's a good
That
point,
should
right?
tell you right there that it's
It's emotionally charged.
it's an emotionally charged,
Yep.
based on an opinion that you have.
Well, and it goes up there.
I'm trying to keep.
Yeah, no. I get it. But here's the deal, right? Is
Uh,
what's the actual potential? You know your schools.
yeah. Like
You know who's in your schools. So what's the potential? What's the probability that your school or your district or what have you is going to be a target of mass deportation of students while they're in school? I don't know, but as a take the emotions out of it, take the politics out of it, look at what the practice is and determine how that impacts your school. And what's the safety impact? And are you doing anything? And this is probably the most important point. And we talked about it in the first segment of the party thrown by the principal and the teacher. Are you doing anything that is jeopardizing the safety of your school and your students? And if you can say, I am not, then go forth and conquer, right? But if you sit back and say, this could have a negative impact on our schools, then maybe we ought to find a different way to do it,
mm,
right? If we're going to take this hard nosed stance, I am going to fight to the death, which I don't really understand what that means, right? Uh, or we that's just a silly emotional statement.
yeah.
And it's easy to say when you're not likely to ever face that, right? But if you are, what does that mean? And if your teachers are saying that, what does that mean? And is that the message that you want coming from your staff? If it
Probably
is,
probably shouldn't have that person be the first contact.
right, right?
Just a
Or
suggestion.
maybe that's not the person who should be teaching our kids. I
Well,
don't know.
there's that too.
Right. So, but that's not why we're here today. Here, what we're really saying is understand the circumstances, create policy, go to your state and find out what their policy and your legal counsel, right? Because ultimately, who's going to decide whether you're right or wrong on this is going to be the judiciary, right? And if you push it that far, ultimately that's who's going to weigh in on this. And if that's where you're going to decide this, that's a long battle, by the way, and you better have the right ammunition on your side. You should be on the right side of the law and make sure that your legal counsel is aware of what it is that you're doing and make sure they understand how to articulate your rights, your authority, the expectations, so that you understand it. So when somebody comes knocking on your door, you're in the right. Because here, I guess here's the if you are wrong, you're in violation of federal law.
Yeah. Now you're in trouble.
Now you're in trouble. I guess you'd have to ask the question, if I take a stance and I'm in violation of federal law or obstruction or what have you, Who's responsible for that? Or is that within the scope of your employment? We talked a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah.
And so that's really what you're saying here. Because if you work outside of the scope of your employment, you're on your own, right? And if you're willing to do that, then
Might have to look for another job
well,
after you get
eh,
out of jail.
right? That's and I'm not trying to say that
Uh,
um, to threaten people or anything like that, because obviously I come from a law enforcement background and so forth. But I will say that having come from that background, there are people who have thought they were doing the right thing, emotionally charged, politically charged. I'm doing this. This is the right. Okay, but you're still going to jail, right? And you can. I mean, that's okay because I'm going to take you to jail and you're going to go sit in jail and you're going to do all that stuff that comes with that. And what? You didn't change my mind because all I'm doing there is enforcing the law. I'm going to go put you in jail, and then I'm going to go on and do something else, right? So
yeah.
um, there's the way to address politics. There's the way to address the laws and change the laws. But I see this all the time on traffic stops where they get so emotional about it that they can't think straight. And it gets to the point where you just sit there and go, look, this is not the time and place to debate whether you're right or I'm right. That's what the courts are for,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the whole reason we have them. I'm not the decider of right and wrong as a law enforcement officer. I'm the person who decides, yeah, I think this is probably wrong and I can take action based upon my authority. But I'm not the ultimate decider. Somebody else is. So if I've already decided that I'm right and I have the authority to arrest, now is not the time to debate that. Call me into court, get your attorney, I'll get my attorney, and my attorney happens to be the prosecutor, but and they'll look at it and say, yeah, Kelly, you were got this a lot of times. You're right, but we're not going to prosecute this. Okay, that's not for me to decide,
Yeah.
right? So it just put yourself in a position where you are not harming your school, you are not harming the kids, you are not putting your staff in a position that they could potentially suffer some very negative consequences. So stay in your lane, understand what you're dealing with here, understand the emotions, the politics. Make sure you go back to the three pillars of school safety: policies, systems, processes, and people. Make sure those are all aligned with each other. Make sure your policies, your processes, and your systems are all aligned and that your people understand their role, their responsibility, what forms to fill out, who to call if you have a question, all of those things. Work through that. I think it was there was once a wise man that said, uh, "When was the best time to plant a tree?"
Like a year
20
ago?
years ago.
20 years
20
ago?
years ago. 20 years ago. The next best time to
Now.
plant a tree? Today. So, and what that means is if you want to prepare yourself to reap the benefits of the shade of the tree, you need to work long before it was big enough to get the shade there, right? But if you didn't do it 20 years ago, every day you wait is another 20 years that you're going to wait to benefit for that. So get started now, start working through those things, and you'll be much better off for it. Get left of bang. And this is when you think of prevention and mitigation and so forth, this is one of the biggest opportunities that you have if you haven't experienced any immigration issues in the schools. If you haven't done that yet, this is one of the biggest opportunities you have because you have the time right now. Start digging that hole, planting that tree, and make sure that you're prepared for that, because I don't know how extensive these are going to be. I don't. I don't have any idea. And there are going to be some schools that are much more impacted in this sense than other schools, but no school's exempt from the potential here. But, when we're talking about border states and large population centers, those are the ones that are going to have the most impact, I believe, if any. But there are schools that have been dealing with this for many years, many years. So policies are out there, and the procedures and how you deal with them is likely not going to change, which also goes to the emotion and the politics that are being injected into this issue.
All right.
Your turn. Your turn.
My turn? No, I think that was good. I can leave it at that.
Okay.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.